What if the man everyone saw as a failure was the only one who could save them? What if the janitor they mocked, the single father they pitied, was hiding a secret so profound it could shatter their entire world? Alex Thorne scrubbed at the stubborn grease stain on the warehouse floor, the harsh chemical smell stinging his nostrils. Each circular motion of the rag was a meditation, a small, repetitive act that kept the chaos at bay. The chaos wasn't the spill, it was the symphony of sneers and whispers that followed him through every shift. Leading the orchestra was Mark, a burly forklift driver with a cruel smirk permanently etched onto his face. "Hey, Thorne," Mark boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Missed a spot. Wouldn't want the boss to think his top janitor is slacking, would we?" A few nearby workers snickered. Alex didn't look up. He just kept scrubbing, his knuckles raw against the rough concrete. He had learned long ago that reacting was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Silence was his shield. "What's the matter, cat, got your tongue?" Mark prodded, stepping closer until his steel-toed boots were inches from Alex's hand. "Or are you just too tired from playing mommy and daddy all by yourself? Must be tough, a man like you trying to raise a kid. No wonder you ended up here." The words were designed to be daggers, and they were sharp. They pricked at the rawest parts of him, his grief, his fierce, protective love for his daughter, Lily, and the life he had chosen to keep her safe. But on the surface, he was stone. He simply moved his hand and continued his work. He could feel Mark's frustration, the bully's need for a reaction, for a sign that his venom had found its mark. But Alex gave him nothing. His focus was singular, the clock on the wall. In 2 hours and 17 minutes, he would be home. He would walk into his tiny, 2-bedroom apartment, and a 7-year-old girl with his late wife's eyes would run into his arms. Lily. She was the reason he endured this. She was the reason he scrubbed floors instead of commanding shadows. She was the anchor that kept him grounded in this quiet, anonymous life. "Leave him alone, Mark," a firm voice cut through the tension. Sarah Jenkins, the shift supervisor, stood with her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of annoyance and disappointment. She was sharp, efficient, and one of the few people who looked at Alex with something other than pity or contempt. She saw a man, not a caricature. Mark grumbled, shooting Alex one last venomous look before lumbering back to his forklift. "Just having a bit of fun, Sarah. Thorne doesn't mind, do you?" He didn't wait for an answer. Sarah watched him go before her gaze softened as it fell on Alex. "You all right?" she asked, her voice low. Alex finally looked up, his gray eyes, so often clouded with weariness, meeting hers. "I'm fine," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Thank you," she nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. It was a look he was beginning to recognize, a curiosity, a skepticism that the man scrubbing the floor was the whole story. She saw the way he moved, an economy of motion that spoke of discipline, not defeat. She saw the quiet dignity he maintained under a constant barrage of insults. She saw the fierce, unyielding love for his daughter in the rare moments he spoke of her. But she couldn't reconcile those glimpses with the worn-out coveralls and the resigned slump of his shoulders. She lingered for a moment longer. "Don't let him get to you. He's just a bitter man with a small life." Alex offered a small, ghost of a smile. "I don't," he replied, and it was the honest truth. Mark's words were pebbles against a fortress wall. The real threats, the ones he had spent years running from, were far more terrifying than a workplace bully. The final bell chimed, releasing him. He cleaned his equipment with meticulous care, stored it away, and clocked out. The walk to his car, a 15-year-old sedan with a patchwork of rust and primer, was a ritual of decompression. He shed the skin of Alex Thorne, the janitor, with each step. As he drove through the rain-slick city streets, his thoughts turned solely to Lily. He pictured her sitting at their small kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration as she worked on her spelling homework. He imagined the way her face would light up when he walked through the door, a radiant sunbeam in his gray world. When he finally opened the door to their apartment, the scent of cinnamon and warm laundry greeted him. "Daddy!" Lily's shriek of joy was the only welcome he ever needed. She launched herself into his arms, wrapping her small limbs around him with a strength that belied her size. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her strawberry shampoo. This was his sanctuary. This was his purpose. "How was my little star today?" he murmured, setting her down. "I got a gold star in reading," she announced proudly, pointing to the sticker on her shirt. "And Mrs. Davis said I'm the best artist in the whole class," he smiled, a genuine, soul-deep smile that erased all the lines of fatigue from his face. "Of course you are. You got that from your mom." He helped her with her math homework, his large, calloused hand surprisingly gentle as he guided her pencil. Later, as he tucked her into bed, she traced the faint, silvery line of a scar on his forearm. "Daddy, where did you get this one?" she asked, her voice sleepy. It was a familiar question. He had a constellation of scars, each a map of a life he had buried. "Just an old accident from a long time ago, sweetie," he said, the practiced lie slipping out easily. "From an old job. Were you a hero, Daddy?" she whispered, her eyes fluttering closed. He kissed her forehead, his heart aching with a love so fierce it was a physical pain. "The only hero I ever wanted to be," he said softly, "is yours." He sat by her bed until her breathing evened out into the steady rhythm of sleep. In the quiet of the night, the ghosts of his past felt closer. He had built this life, this fragile piece, brick by painstaking brick. And he would let nothing, and no one, ever tear it down. The next day was Lily's 8th birthday. He had promised her a special, triple-layer chocolate cake from a bakery across town, her absolute favorite. After his shift, he drove his sputtering car through a sudden downpour, the wipers struggling to keep up with the deluge. The old engine coughed, but held. He was so focused on the cake, on the image of Lily's face when she saw it, that he almost didn't see the car on the shoulder of the road. It was a sleek, black Mercedes, a vehicle that looked like it belonged on a different planet than his rust bucket. Its hazard lights blinked in the gloom, a beacon of distress. A man in a tailored suit stood beside it, getting soaked, staring helplessly at a completely flat rear tire. Alex's first instinct was to keep driving. Don't get involved. Stay invisible. It was the mantra that had kept him and Lily safe for 5 years. But then he saw the frustration on the man's face, the vulnerability of being stranded. His own ingrained code of conduct, the part of him that was forged in crucibles of fire and loyalty, wouldn't let him just drive by. With a sigh that fogged the windshield, he pulled over. He grabbed the worn toolkit from his trunk and jogged through the rain to the stranded car. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice muffled by the storm. The man in the suit looked him up and down, taking in his worn jeans and faded jacket, his expression a mixture of relief and disdain. "You know how to change a tire on one of these?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "The principle is the same," Alex replied evenly, already kneeling to inspect the wheel. He worked with a quiet, efficient grace, the motions familiar and automatic. The lug nuts were tight, but his hands, accustomed to hard work, loosened them with practiced ease. As he worked, the passenger door of the Mercedes opened. Another figure stepped out, holding an umbrella over the driver. "Any luck, boss?" the newcomer asked, his voice a low gravelly rumble with a distinct Eastern European accent. Alex didn't look up, his focus on aligning the spare. But the voice, it was a cold finger tracing a line down his spine. It was a sound from a nightmare he thought he had escaped. Slowly, deliberately, he tightened the last lug nut and rose to his feet. He turned, wiping the rain and grime from his face with the back of his hand, and his eyes met the passengers. Time stopped. The rain, the traffic, the thrumming of his own heart, it all faded into a dull roar. The man holding the umbrella was older, his face lined with cruelty, but the eyes were the same. They were the cold, dead eyes of Dmitry Volkov, a ghost from his past, a monster he had personally put in a cage a lifetime ago. A man who was supposed to be rotting in a maximum security prison for the rest of his unnatural life. Volkov's eyes widened for a fraction of a second in pure, unadulterated shock. Disbelief warred with a dawning, predatory recognition. The janitor, the nobody on the side of the road, was not a stranger. A slow, chilling smile spread across Volkov's face. Well, well," he purred, the sound like grinding glass. "Agent Thorne. Or is it just Alex now? I almost didn't recognize you without the body armor and the self-righteous glare." The driver looked back and forth between them, his face a mask of confusion. Alex felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a fear more potent than anything he had ever faced in the field, because this time, it wasn't just his life on the line. It was Lily's. His face remained a placid mask, a skill honed over years of deception. He betrayed nothing. "You have me mistaken for someone else," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He turned to the driver. "You're all set. Drive carefully on the spare." He started to walk back to his car, every nerve screaming at him to run, to grab Lily and disappear again. "Not so fast," Volkov called out, his tone silky but laced with iron. "We must thank you for your kindness." "A reward?" Alex didn't stop. "No thanks necessary." He slid into the driver's seat of his old car, the familiar scent of worn upholstery a small, hollow comfort. He turned the key, praying the engine would start. It sputtered once, twice, then caught with a reassuring roar. As he pulled away, he glanced in his rearview mirror. Volkov was still standing there in the rain, the cruel smile fixed on his face, watching him go. He hadn't just been found. He had been marked. The drive home was a blur. The chocolate cake sat forgotten on the passenger seat. His mind was a maelstrom of tactical assessments and worst-case scenarios. He had been compromised. His meticulously constructed fortress had been breached by a random act of kindness, a cruel twist of fate. How was Volkov out? Who had he paid off? How had he found him? The questions were irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the threat. Volkov knew he was here. And Volkov was a man who feasted on revenge. When he got home, he hugged Lily with a desperate intensity that made her squirm. "Daddy, you're squishing me." He forced a smile, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Sorry, sweetie. Just so happy to see you." That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the dark living room, watching the street below. He saw it just after 2 a.m., a black sedan, the same model as the one Volkov was in, parked half a block down, its windows tinted, a silent predator waiting in the urban jungle. They were watching him. The next day at work was torture. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every unfamiliar face was a potential enemy. He felt exposed, vulnerable. Mark, oblivious to the life and death struggle raging inside Alex, chose that day to be particularly vicious. He'd seen Alex's car in the parking lot and had a fresh well of mockery to draw from. "Saw your ride, Thorne," he announced to the break room. "I've seen better cars in a junkyard. How do you even take your kid anywhere in that death trap?" "It's practically child abuse." Sarah shot Mark a look of pure disgust. She had noticed the change in Alex immediately. The usual weariness in his eyes had been replaced by a hyper-vigilant tension, a coiled readiness that made the hairs on her arms stand up. He was scanning the room, checking exits, his posture subtly different. "Alex, is everything okay?" she asked quietly when they were alone by the supply closet. He wanted to tell her. He wanted to unload the crushing weight of his secret, to ask for help. But telling her would put her in danger. Ignorance was her only protection. "Just a long night," he lied, his voice strained. He turned away, creating a distance between them he knew would hurt her, but it was necessary. He had to handle this alone. The proof of that came in the early afternoon. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A text from an unknown number. He opened it, and his blood ran cold. It was a picture of Lily. She was on the swings at her school playground, her hair flying, a joyful smile on her face. It had been taken from a distance, through a chain-link fence. A candid, stolen moment. Below the picture were 2 words, "Beautiful girl." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A promise of what he stood to lose. Rage, cold and pure, washed over him, eclipsing the fear. This was the line. They had watched his home. They had followed him. But bringing Lily into it. They had just signed their own death warrants. He walked off the warehouse floor, ignoring Sarah's concerned call. In the quiet of a deserted hallway, he pulled out a small, battered burner phone he hadn't touched in 5 years. He punched in a number from memory, a number that connected to a world he had left behind. After 3 rings, a gruff voice answered with a single, coded word. Alex responded in kind, his voice dropping to a low, authoritative tone that would have been unrecognizable to his coworkers. "It's Ghost," he said, using his old call sign. "I've been compromised. Asset in danger. I need a cleanup crew and an exfil package, priority 1. The target is Dmitry Volkov." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Volkov is dead," the voice finally said. "No," Alex replied, his own voice like ice. "He's not. And he's here. He gave the location, the description of the car, the timeline. He was no longer a janitor. He was an operative, a weapon being unsheathed. He knew Volkov wouldn't wait long. The photo was a prelude. The attack would be swift and targeted at his only vulnerability, Lily. He had to get to her before they did. He raced out of the warehouse, his old car peeling out of the parking lot. He drove with a precision and aggression that defied the vehicle's age, weaving through traffic, his mind calculating routes and probabilities. But he wasn't the only one heading for the school. Sarah, deeply worried by his abrupt departure and the raw fear she'd seen in his eyes, had decided to follow him. She couldn't explain it, but she felt a primal need to make sure he was all right. And, in a pathetic twist of malice, Mark had also followed. He was convinced Alex was involved in some shady deal, drugs, maybe, and he wanted to catch him in the act, to finally have the ultimate leverage to get him fired and humiliate him in front of everyone, especially Sarah. All three cars converged on the quiet suburban street outside Northwood Elementary just as the final bell rang. Children began to pour out of the doors, their laughter filling the air. Alex spotted Lily immediately, her bright pink backpack a beacon in the crowd. And then he saw them. Two men, large and imposing, detaching themselves from the shadow of an oak tree and beginning to move toward her. At the same instant, Mark's truck screeched to a halt beside him. Mark jumped out, his phone already recording. "What's the deal, Thorne?" he sneered, his voice loud. "Meeting your supplier? I've got you now." Sarah pulled up behind them, her eyes wide with confusion and alarm as she took in the scene, Alex's rigid posture, the two men closing in on Lily, Mark's idiotic confrontation. Everything happened in a heartbeat. The world seemed to slow down. Alex saw the glint of metal in one of the men's hands, a syringe. They weren't going to be loud. They were going to sedate her and carry her away. He saw Mark, a braying fool, oblivious to the real danger, blocking his path. He saw Sarah, her hand flying to her mouth in horror as she finally understood. In that fraction of a second, the janitor died. The man who moved was Ghost. He shoved Mark aside with a force that sent the larger man stumbling back against his truck, the phone clattering to the pavement. "Stay in the car and lock the doors," he commanded Sarah, his voice a blade of cold steel she had never heard before. He moved not like a man, but like a force of nature. He covered the 50 feet to Lily in a blur of motion, intercepting the first man just as he reached for her. There was no flashy fight. It was brutal, efficient, and devastatingly fast. A precise strike to the throat, a twist of the arm that shattered an elbow, and the first man was on the ground, gurgling. The second man, seeing his partner fall, pulled a knife. Alex disarmed him with a fluid, practiced motion, the knife spinning in the air before he caught it. He didn't use it. He used his hands, a rapid series of disabling strikes to the man's joints, leaving him crippled and gasping on the pavement beside his partner. It was over in less than 5 seconds. Lily, who had just turned around upon hearing the commotion, saw only her father standing over two mean men who had fallen down. "Daddy, what happened?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Alex scooped her into his arms, his entire posture softening as he held her. He turned, shielding her body with his own, his eyes scanning for Volkov. He saw him, sitting in the black sedan across the street, his face a mask of fury and disbelief at the speed with which his plan had been dismantled. Alex met his gaze, a silent promise passing between them, "This ends now." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, the cleanup crew he had called. Mark was still slumped against his truck, his face pale, his jaw hanging open in slack-jawed terror. He had come to mock a janitor and had instead witnessed a demon at work. Sarah was out of her car, her eyes locked on Alex, filled not with fear, but with a dawning, breathtaking understanding. The men she had been drawn to, the quiet, gentle father, was all of that and something more. Something powerful and dangerous, but a danger directed only at those who threatened what he loved. Uniformed tactical officers swarmed the scene, taking Volkov and his men into custody with professional efficiency. The lead officer approached Alex, his expression respectful. "It's over, Ghost. Volkov won't be seeing the light of day again. We have you and your daughter in protective custody until we can relocate you." Alex shook his head, still holding Lily tight. "No. No more running. This is my home." The next day, the story was a sanitized whisper at the warehouse. Mark was fired, Not just for the harassment, but for obstruction and reckless endangerment. His world had been shattered by the revelation that the man he had tormented was a national hero. He couldn't even look at Alex's empty locker without trembling. That evening, Sarah came to Alex's apartment. The black sedan was gone from the street. For the first time in years, the space felt truly safe. Lily was asleep, dreaming peacefully. They sat at the small kitchen table, the silence thick but not uncomfortable. "You should have told me," she said softly, but there was no accusation in her voice. "I couldn't," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Telling you would have put a target on your back." He told her everything then. About his past in a clandestine special operations unit, about his wife's death in a retaliatory attack, and about his decision to disappear to give Lily a normal life. He laid the fractured pieces of his past before her, expecting her to run. Instead, she reached across the table and took his scarred hand in hers. "You're a good man, Alex Thorne," she said, her eyes shining. "And an incredible father. You don't have to be alone anymore." In her touch, he felt the promise of a new beginning, a future where he didn't have to hide. He was still a single dad, still a man who worked with his hands, but he was no longer invisible. He had been seen, truly seen, for the hero he had always been. How many heroes walk among us, hidden in plain sight, their capes tucked away beneath worn-out work clothes? Look closer at the quiet ones, the underdogs, the single parents fighting silent battles. You might just be looking at the strongest person you will ever know. Share this story if you believe in the hidden strength within us all, and comment with a time you misjudged someone who turned out to be extraordinary.